The Predator Tactics exam was designed by a species that believed fear was a muscle, something you could flex until the weaker thing tore itself apart. The proving ground lay beneath a false sky, a manufactured wilderness calibrated to punish hesitation. Jagged basalt ridges cut the horizon, wind screamed through metallic trees, and heat shimmered just enough to blur motion. Every sensor, every kill zone, had been tuned for creatures born to hunt. Instructor Threx watched the deployment with narrowed eyes, his mandibles clicking softly as squads were released. He was a veteran of 3 extinction campaigns and carried the certainty of a being who had never been prey. Around him, other instructors leaned forward, anticipation sharpened by contempt. This exam separated predators from pretenders. Most candidates broke before the first hour ended. The human stood alone at the edge of the drop platform. He was smaller than every other cadet, unarmored compared to the chitin and plated muscle surrounding him. No claws. No fangs. No visible augmentations. His name tag read Elias Ward, though few bothered to remember it. The assumption had already been made. Administrative error, political inclusion, a specimen to be documented and dismissed. Human, Threx said through the calm, voice heavy with amusement. You may request reassignment. Elias looked out over the terrain, eyes moving with slow precision. Negative, instructor. There was no tremor in his voice. No bravado either. Just acknowledgement. The platform shuddered, and gravity took him. The exam began with noise. Roars echoed as Apex cadets asserted dominance, tearing into the environment to announce themselves. One species shattered stone to mark territory. Another flooded the lowlands with pheromones that sent lesser organisms fleeing. Combat erupted within minutes. Spectacular, brutal, efficient. The feeds filled with motion and blood and victory. The human did not appear on any of them. At first, no one noticed. Humans were expected to fail quietly. Threx turned his attention to the stronger displays, offering corrections, recording kills, watching as instincts collided with strategy. This was how predators learned, through force, through loss. An hour passed. Status update. An instructor murmured, scrolling through the tactical overlay. I'm missing 3 signals. Destroyed. Another replied without concern. The marsh sector is lethal. For now, the first said, frowning. No death flags. Threx leaned closer. The map showed a spreading absence, nodes blinking out without the accompanying flare of termination. No emergency pings. No combat markers. Just silence. He pulled up the human's tracker. It was still active. Moving. Slowly. Elias moved like someone who had no intention of being seen. He skirted the loud places, avoided the obvious paths, and let the predators announce themselves to the world. When he stopped, it was always where terrain bent sound or swallowed heat. When he advanced, it was along lines of inevitability, not pursuit. A squad of Varn, 4-meter bipeds bred for pack slaughter, cut across a ravine below him. Their leader barked orders, confident, senses flared. Elias waited until the wind shifted, until the last of them passed beneath the overhang. He did not attack. He triggered a collapse. Stone thundered down, precise and overwhelming. The ravine became a trap with no exits, dust-choking sensors, limbs pinned without killing force. When the feed reconnected, the Varn were alive, immobilized, and marked eliminated. Threx felt something unfamiliar tighten behind his eyes. This is interference, an instructor snapped. Environmental abuse. It's tactics, another said quietly. More feeds dropped. A predator was found bound to a tree, pulse steady, weapons removed. Another lay unconscious in shallow water, breathing unobstructed, tagged and discarded like a solved equation. No wounds. No triumph displays. Just outcomes. The predators began to slow. They stopped roaring. They clustered, confusion seeping into movements that had never known doubt. Apex senses searched for a threat that refused to present itself. Elias listened. He tracked heartbeats through soil, measured stride lengths by vibration, learned habits in minutes that others took generations to refine. Where predators hunted desire, he hunted patterns. Where they sought dominance, he sought control. By the third hour, the exam floor had changed. Not in terrain, but in mood. The silence had weight now. The kind that made even killers whisper. A ping cut through the control room, an open channel request. Calethrex hesitated, then accepted. Elias's face appeared on the display, dirt-streaked, eyes alert, breathing calm. Behind him, a bound predator shifted weakly, fear unmistakable. "Instructor," Elias said, as if checking in after a routine drill. "I've completed my objectives." Calethrex stared. "The exam is ongoing." Elias nodded once. "Understood." Clarification requested. The room leaned in. "When I neutralize the remaining candidates," Elias continued, "do you want them returned alive or in pieces?" The channel closed. For the first time since the Academy was founded, the Predator Tactics exam went silent, not from system failure, but because no one present knew how to answer. Silence, Elias had learned, was not the absence of action, but the result of it. After the channel closed, the wilderness changed its behavior. Predators stopped charging blindly through brush and stone. They moved low, weapons raised, senses flaring so aggressively they bled into one another. Fear made them noisy in new ways, erratic, inefficient. Elias remained unseen. He shifted deeper into the manufactured forest, where the metallic trunks sang faintly when wind passed through them. Every step he took was measured against three variables: sound, silhouette, and consequence. He did not hurry. Time favored the one who controlled it, and the predators were already spending theirs too quickly. Calethrex replayed the human's last transmission on a private loop, mandibles still. The question had not been a threat. It had been procedural. That was what unsettled him most. Around him, instructors argued in sharp bursts, some demanding immediate termination of the exercise, others insisting this was precisely why the exam existed. Calethrex said nothing. His attention stayed on the map. The human signal was moving again, angling toward a convergence point where three predator squads had unknowingly begun circling one another. Apex instincts drove them toward perceived dominance, not realizing they were being guided by absences, routes left open, tracks deliberately misread, terrain that seemed coincidentally favorable. Elias had learned their decision-making curves and was bending them gently, the way a river shapes stone without force. The first clash never happened. A Kethari scout dropped without warning, legs tangled in monofilament anchored between roots. He hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from him, but not hard enough to break bone. Before he could signal, a dampening field muffled his transmitter. Elias watched from above, noting respiration rate, waiting until panic peaked and began to collapse inward. Only then did he mark the scout eliminated and move on. Elsewhere, two predator leaders froze when their thermal overlays flickered. The heat signatures they'd been tracking fragmented, then vanished entirely. They advanced anyway, unwilling to accept a world where prey dictated terms. Their confidence carried them straight into a dead zone where the ground sloped just enough to destabilize footing. Elias didn't need to be present. Gravity and exhaustion did the work for him. One instructor slammed a clawed fist into the console. "This is degradation warfare. Psychological sabotage." Calethrex finally spoke. "So is fear." On the ground, the predators began to understand what they were facing, though none would have named it correctly. They whispered among themselves, exchanging fragments of sightings that never aligned. A shadow that wasn't there. A sound that came from the wrong direction. A fallen comrade breathing, alive, but stripped of the will to rejoin the hunt. Elias intercepted their communications with quiet efficiency. He listened, not to gloat, but to refine. Each word revealed a bias, a reflex, a flaw. Apex species relied on escalation. When confused, they became louder, more aggressive, more predictable. He adjusted accordingly. He encountered resistance once. A massive Drath commander, armored and disciplined, had chosen stillness over pursuit. He waited in a defensible position, weapons aligned, mind sharp. Elias observed him for nearly 20 minutes, impressed. This one would not blunder into a trap. So Elias changed the equation. He disrupted the commander's sense of control, subtle shifts in the environment, a delayed echo here, a false movement there. Nothing overt, just enough to suggest a presence that refused to commit. The Drath's patience frayed by degrees. When he finally moved, it was with precision, but along a path Elias had already measured. The takedown was swift, close, and silent. Elias disabled the commander's weapon, applied pressure where armor met joint, and lowered him to the ground with care. The Drath struggled, then stilled, eyes wide not with pain, but with comprehension. "You could have killed me," the commander rasped. Elias secured the restraints. "I know." He moved on. The control room watched the count drop toward 0. Not a single fatality. Not a single uncontrolled engagement. The predators were not being beaten. They were being processed. Kael'threx felt the old certainties erode. Predators were meant to dominate through presence, through terror made visible. The human did neither. He reduced fear to a tool, applied with restraint, and withdrew before it could consume him. Another open channel request appeared. The room fell quiet. Elias's voice carried without strain. "Remaining candidates are contained or in retreat. No active resistance." Kael'threx hesitated. Pride warred with something colder and more honest. "State your intent." A pause. Long enough to remind everyone that the human did not need permission to continue. "Intent remains unchanged," Elias said. "Exam completion." The feed cut. On the map, the last predator signal went still, not dead, not victorious, simply finished. The wilderness returned to its ambient noise, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But the silence that lingered in the control room was heavier than before, charged with the realization that the exam had not revealed the limits of a human. It had revealed the limits of predators who believed themselves unchallenged. Somewhere beneath the false sky, Elias stood alone, waiting, not for permission, but for acknowledgement. The order to suspend the exam did not come immediately. That delay mattered. Kael'threx felt it like a pressure behind his eyes as instructors argued over protocol, pride, and precedent. To halt the trial now would be to admit that the framework itself had failed to anticipate a certain kind of predator. Yet every moment they hesitated, the human remained in control of a battlefield designed to humble gods of the hunt. "Bring them out," one instructor demanded. "Recall the cadets." "You assume he will comply," another replied. As if summoned by the doubt, Elias's signal shifted again. He was moving, not retreating, not advancing toward extraction, but circling. Kael'threx realized, with a jolt of clarity, that the human was accounting for them as well. The control room was just another node in the system, another variable to be managed. The remaining predators attempted a final consolidation. Those still mobile gathered at the basalt ridge, weapons overlapping, senses stretched to their limits. They formed a wall of muscle and intent, a living argument against being hunted. It was the kind of display that had broken lesser species into flight within seconds. Elias watched from a distance and did not engage. Instead, he waited for fatigue to do what fear could not. The predators had been alert for hours, adrenaline bleeding into exhaustion. Their formations tightened, then loosened, discipline fraying at the edges. When one shifted position, another compensated too late. Elias marked the timing, then began to act. A low-frequency pulse rippled through the ground, barely perceptible, but enough to disrupt balance. One predator stumbled, another caught him, formation broken for a breath. That was all Elias needed. He moved in the blind space created by their correction, striking not with violence, but with sequence. A joint locked here, a weapon disabled there. A body guided to the ground before it could crash. He flowed through them like a problem solving itself. When it ended, the ridge was quiet. The predators lay alive, restrained, staring up at a sky that had not witnessed their defeat because there had been nothing dramatic to see. No final stand. No roar. Just inevitability. Elias activated the open channel himself this time. "All candidates neutralized," he said. "Requesting extraction." Calthrex studied the display, searching for something: anger, triumph, bloodlust. He found none. The human's pulse was elevated but steady, his breathing controlled. He looked like someone finishing a task, not surviving a war. Why? Calthrex asked before he could stop himself. Elias tilted his head slightly. Clarify. You had authority to kill, the instructor said. You demonstrated capacity. Why spare them? The human considered this, not as a moral challenge, but as a genuine question. Because killing would have ended the exam, he replied. This doesn't. The words settled heavily. Around Calthrex, the instructors fell silent, confronted with an answer that exposed the shallow scope of their own thinking. The exam had been about dominance, about proving who stood at the top of a food chain. Elias had treated it as an exercise in control, where death was the least interesting outcome. Extraction teams moved in cautiously, as if the battlefield might object. One by one, predators were lifted out, eyes following the human with something that was not hatred. It was recognition. They had faced something that did not need to posture to be dangerous. As Elias was escorted toward the platform, a restrained Drath commander spoke, voice rough but steady. What are you? He asked. Elias paused. He did not look back. Human, he said. That's enough. The platform rose, carrying him away from the false wilderness. Below, the terrain reset itself, erasing evidence with mechanical indifference. But the damage had already been done, not to bodies, but to assumptions. Calthrex watched the human ascend and felt a shift he could not name. Predators were meant to inspire fear through presence. Elias had inspired it through absence, through the quiet certainty that resistance had been anticipated and accounted for. As the platform doors closed, Calthrex understood that the Academy would not recover from this unchanged. The question was no longer whether humans belonged among predators. It was whether the definition of predator itself needed to be rewritten. The tribunal chamber was built to intimidate. Its ceiling arched too high, its lights too cold, its seats arranged so that anyone standing at the center felt measured from every angle. Elias stood there with his hands at his sides, posture relaxed but attentive, as if the room were a briefing hall rather than a court designed to weigh extinction-level decisions. Calthrex occupied the central dais, flanked by instructors who had once believed the Predator Tactics exam was a closed system. The recovered cadets were absent by protocol, but their presence lingered in the chamber's silence. No one spoke of injuries. There were none worth naming. The damage lay elsewhere. You violated no written rule, Calthrex began, voice steady. Yet the exam did not unfold as intended. Elias met his gaze. The objectives were clear. They were, Calthrex agreed. Our assumptions were not. A murmur rippled through the chamber, quickly suppressed. The instructors were not debating guilt. They were debating classification. Species were ranked, indexed, understood through centuries of blood and data. Humans had arrived late, fragile by most metrics, and had been filed accordingly. Elias had torn through that filing system without raising his voice. You reduced apex predators without lethal force, one instructor said. Explain the doctrine behind that choice. Elias exhaled slowly. Predators hunt to eat or to dominate, he said. We hunt to end problems. The words were not a boast. They were a correction. Calthrex felt the weight of them settle. And if the problem requires death? Then we use it, Elias replied. But only if it's necessary. Otherwise, it's wasteful. Wasteful. The concept was alien in a room where victory had always been measured in bodies. Calthrex studied the human anew, seeing not softness, but discipline. An aversion to excess born not of mercy, but of efficiency. The tribunal recessed briefly. When they returned, the decision had already been made, though no one present would claim authorship. The Academy could not erase what had happened, nor could it afford to ignore it. Humans will be reclassified, Calthrex announced. Not as support species. Not as prey-adjacent. Strategic apex predators. The chamber remained silent, absorbing the implication. Strategic. Apex. Predators who did not need to look like monsters to be feared. Elias nodded once. Acknowledged. Dismissed, he exited the chamber alone. The corridor beyond was lined with cadets, those recovered from the exam and those who would face it in the future. Conversations died as he passed. Some looked away. Others watched openly, curiosity braided with caution. No one challenged him. No one spoke. Outside, the training grounds stretched under another artificial sky. New squads drilled, their movement sharp but uncertain. Whispers followed Elias's path, fragments of a story already becoming doctrine. The exam that went silent. The question that froze an academy. Alive or in pieces? Kael'threx observed from a distance, the memory of that question still resonant. He understood now that the human had never been asking for permission. He had been offering a choice, one rooted in control rather than cruelty. That was the difference that mattered. As Elias reached the edge of the grounds, a junior instructor approached, hesitation plain. "Will humans always fight this way?" he asked. Elias considered the sky, the neatly ordered world built by a species who believed chaos could be mastered through force. "Only when it's required," he said. "Most of the time, we prefer you never notice us at all." He walked on, leaving the academy with its definitions rearranged and its certainties stripped bare. The predators would adapt, they always did. But they would do so with a new understanding etched into training manuals and instincts alike. Somewhere beyond the walls, humanity continued its quiet work, unnamed and uncelebrated. It did not roar to announce its place in the universe. It decided, calculated, and acted, often unseen, often underestimated. And when the galaxy eventually asked what kind of predator humanity was, the answer would not come with teeth or claws. It would arrive in silence,